For this video, we're on our Pythagorean theorem and on our quiz study guide. And we want to find each missing link to the nearest tenth. So these are going to be decimals. I'm not going to ask you to simplify the radicals on this quiz, but I could very well change the directions at some other point. And you could simplify the radicals, no problem. So we're going to need a calculator because we're going to have to take some square roots. And if I have a right triangle, I should be thinking my right triangle theorem, which is the Pythagorean. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Remember that a is a leg, b is a leg, and c is the hypotenuse. C is the most important, so we're always going to start labeling there. Now, it is our longest side, and the easiest way to find it is to start at our right angle and draw a line directly across. And that would be your C every single time. So that is our C, and it's also called the hypotenuse. Now I've got two legs, 4 and 8, and I'm going to do smallest, largest, and say AB. So my a squared plus b squared equals c squared is really 4 squared plus 8 squared equals c squared. So now I need to solve the squareds. So 4 squared is 16 plus 8 squared is 64. Add those together, I get 80 equals c squared. But I don't want c squared, I just want c, so this is where your calculator comes in handy. You're going to have to hit your second x squared key right here, and that's your square root. And then you can put in your 80 right into there. Hit your equals, and we're going to round it to the nearest tenth, so that is 0.9 because the 4 leaves it alone. So we're going to say 8.9. And that makes sense because C should be our largest side, and that is the longest right there. Let's go over to 8. Let's see what we are given. Across from that right angle is our C. And then I'm given two legs, an A and a B. So for my Pythagorean theorem, I've got 3 squared plus, I think that's a 6. Let's call it a 6. It might not be, but we'll call it anyway. 6 squared, and that equals a C squared. So 3 squared is 9, plus 6 squared is 36, and altogether that is 45, but that is c squared. Make sure you always take your square root as your last step. So my square root of 45, going to my calculator again, is 6.7. That 0 leaves the 7 alone. So my c on this one is 6.7. Alright, now let's go to number 9. I've got my right angle, so across from that is my C, and then my small leg, my big leg. So my A squared plus my B squared equals my C squared, or 49 plus 100 equals C squared. So that is 149 equals C squared. This is the time for the calculator again. So in our calculator, you hit second x squared, 149. And hit enter, and we've got 12.2. The 0 leaves the 2 alone, so 12.2. So C equals 12.2. Another double check. Make sure that is your longest side. And yes, that is your longest side. Alright, one more on this page, and then we'll go to the next one. Here's my right angle, so across from that is my C. And then I've got my A and my B. So every single time here on this page, we've solved for the hypotenuse. So we get 3 squared plus 7 squared equals c squared, or 9 plus 49 equals c squared, which is 58 equals c squared. So let's take the square root of 58 and we'll be done. Square root of 58 is 7.6. So the 1 leaves the 6 alone, so 7.6. Okay, let's look at our next couple. So still on Pythagorean theorem here. These are going to be solving for a leg, though, instead of the hypotenuse. I know that because right across from here, I have the hypotenuse already. I already have a C. So, I know we usually do shortest, longest for A, B, but when you have a missing side, I just always find it easier to label the missing one A, and then the one you know B. So I have an A squared, which we don't know, plus a B squared, which I'm going to call 3.6 squared. That's a little hard to read, but I'm going to call it 3.6. And that equals my hypotenuse squared, which is 7.4 squared. So this one, we're still going to solve our squares. It's a decimal already, so let's go to our calculator and solve it there. We get 3.6 squared, which is 12.96. I still have that a squared, though. And my 7.4 squared is 54.76. All right, next step. We used to add when we had both of these sides, but because what we know are on opposite sides of the equal sign, we have to subtract. So we're getting that a squared by itself. So we're subtracting 12.96 to the other side. So in my calculator, I'm going to do that too. 12.96. So subtracting it. Hit equal. And I get 41.8. Now, I know a lot of people are like, oh, I feel like I've done all the work, but you're not done yet because you have an a squared, not an a. So make sure you also take your square root. Now, here's a neat little trick in your calculator. I already have 41.8 in there. So instead of retyping that when I do my square root, I'm going to put my square root in and then hit my second key and my negative key, which says answer above it. And it's going to put in that last answer, and I don't have to retype it. So I save some time that way. Now this one is 6.5 because my 4 is followed by a 6, and the 6 gives the 4 a shove. So when I round to my tenths, I have to round up. And there we go. Now let's do a quick double check. My hypotenuse should be the longest side. My hypotenuse is 7.4. That's shorter than that, so I think we're good. I think we did everything correctly. Let us set up another one over here. I've got my hypotenuse again. And then I've got a missing leg and a leg that was given. So I've got a squared plus 3.9 squared equals 11 squared. Forget my squared there. So let's start by taking 3.9 squared. So what is 3.9 squared? That is 15.21. And that equals 121, which is 11 squared. Now let's go ahead and subtract my 15.21 from my 121. So in my calculator, I'm going to say 121 minus that answer I just had. And that is 105.79 equals a squared. And then I need to take that square root because I still have a square there. So I take my square root of that last answer, and I get just a good old 10.3. Did you round correctly? My 8 in my second spot there is going to make the 2 round up to a 3. Alright, next one. I've got, this one looks pretty even, so let's see if we get a side over here that's around that one, 6.5. So across from that though, I've got a C, and then I have a B and an A, so missing leg A, known leg B. So I've got a squared plus 6.5 squared equals 9.9 squared. So let's start that in the calculator as 6.5 squared. So that is 42.25. And 9.9 squared is 98.01. So our next step is to be subtracting this because they're on opposite sides. So I need to subtract this from that. So I already have my first thing in there, so I'm just going to subtract it right away by hitting my second answer. Oops, I messed that one up. Minus 42.25. There we go. And I've got now a squared equals 55.76. Alright, last step. Guessed it. Square root. All these in with the square root. So we hit our second square root and second answer. And there we go. I've got 7.5. So that 6 makes the 4 round up. That is 7.5. So that one's just a little bit longer than the side over here, just like the picture looks. Alright. One last one before the word problems. The side across from my right angle is my C, and then I'm missing a leg, have a leg. So my a squared plus 9.7 squared equals 13.3 squared. So I'm going to go ahead and put my 9.7 squared into the calculator. And I get 94.09. And that equals 13.3 squared, which is 176.89. So now I need to subtract my 94.09 from that 176.89. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract it right now. 94.09. And I get that a squared equals 82.8. Last step, you guessed it, take that square root. Square root of my answer is 9 point, round it right, 1. So a equals 9.1. So it was 0.9, so that's like saying 9, but we have to round it up to 10 because of that 9. Alright, let's draw a picture for this one. It says a suitcase measure, so suitcases are rectangular. So a suitcase is 24 inches long and 18 inches high. What is the diagonal length of the suitcase? So hopefully you see this right triangle right here. I'll shade it so you can see it a little better. And we've got 2 legs and we need the hypotenuse. So I've got my A and my B. So to solve for this one, I've got 18 squared plus 24 squared equals c squared. So in my calculator, let's put that in. 18 squared is 324 plus 24 squared. Oops, I already went up to 900 there. And then take your square root of that, and you get the square root of 900 is 30. So I was missing a number here that was 24 squared, and that was 576 that I skipped over in my calculator there. Alright, a couple more. Next one says a ladder is leaning against the side of a 10-meter house. So here's our lovely house. And it is 10 meters high. And the ladder is leaning against it. If the base of the ladder is 3 meters away from the house, how tall is the ladder? So we want to know really how big this ladder is right here. So this is another hypotenuse question. So I've got an A and a B given to me. So 3 squared plus 10 squared equals c squared. Or 9 plus 100 equals c squared. Or 109 equals c squared. And here's where we got to go to the calculator again. The square root of 109 is 10.4. So c equals 10.4. Notice this one we didn't round up because the next digit was a 4, so we didn't need to round that 4 up at all. It's an odd length ladder there. Alright, the rope from the top of a sailboat. So here's our sailboat right here. And the rope from the top of the sailboat is attached to a point 6 feet from the base of the boat. Oops, from the mast. So 6 feet from that, and the rope is 24 feet long. So you see the right triangle that we set up there? So the rope was 24 long. It was 6 feet from the base of the mast. So we want to know how tall the mast is. And that is a leg. So I was given a B and a C on this one. So I've got a squared plus 6 squared equals 24 squared. So let's do a little quick work here. A squared plus 36 equals 24 squared. 576. So our subtract our 36 real quick. And we get 540. And then take our square root to finish this up of 540. And we've got our final answer. So A equals 23.2. And there we go. All done.